welcome to session 3 of Unit 5. And in this session, we'll be looking at the discussion method of teaching physics. My name is Patrick Ejay. Now, at the end of this session, you should be able to explain the discussion method of teaching, explain how the method benefits the students, and explain why some students frown against the use of discussion method in class. Then explain how the teacher can use the method to provoke students' thought. And finally, explain the main purpose for using discussion method to teach physics concepts. Now let's look at the nature of discussion. And whenever we talk about discussion, then it means there should be an issue where we share ideas on the issue. We share ideas, and at the end of the day, we should be able to arrive at a conclusion. So in discussion method, the teacher will raise a number of issues for the students to now wrestle with. And this presupposes that the teacher has taken into consideration the fact that students will be able to cope with the issues. So the issues that are being raised by the teacher for students to now discuss, the teacher must have the understanding that students can cope with the issues that are being raised. And for an effective discussion to take place, the assumption here is that students have assimilated data from experience gained on a field trip, through experience from a film, and from a reading assignment. So anytime we want to have a discussion, then the idea is that, or the assumption here is that students have a prior knowledge on the issue on board. So maybe you send your students on a field trip, you presented a video for them to watch, then, or you gave them a reading assignment. So this has already presented them with some prior knowledge on the issue on board. And so once you start, you realize there is that flow of information, that communication now comes, and your students are able to share their ideas on the issue that is on board. And discussion, therefore, can be integrated with, or it can follow a wide variety of activities. So sometimes we can add it to other teaching methods, or we can even have series of activities and we add a discussion to it. So in discussion, students are asked a series of questions to stimulate discussion on the information acquired. So we, assuming you gave your students a reading assignment, now to start discussion, you ask them series of questions so that it will now serve as the starting point for the entire discussion process. And in discussions too, the teacher provides riders and cues as he guides the discussions through the questions that he poses. So the various questions that you pose as a teacher during the discussion process is what is going to give your learners a sense of direction during discussion session. So the teacher should allow the learners to do most of the thinking and talking. So in discussion, as a teacher, you pose a question. Then you now ask your learners to share their views, share their ideas on the topic or the question that you pose. Don't do most of the talking. Let your learners do the talking whenever you are using the discussion method of teaching. And discussion, therefore, offers the opportunity for high level of students' activity and feedback, because they are going to do much of the talking, and so they are actively involved, and they continuously also provide feedback to you, the teacher, and to their colleagues, learners, or students. So in effect, discussion could be effective in developing concepts and skills in problem solving, because you provide your learners with a scenario and they are to discuss, and at the end of the day they are to arrive at a conclusion. So they all have to now agree that yes, this should be the right answer to this question, and so it helps students to develop problem solving skills. Now, how do our students view discussion method of teaching? And we have seen that discussion method requires a great deal of reflective thinking, in that the teacher, you pose questions, and the learners or your students must think about the question and provide an answer. Sometimes it may be that they have to even speak for a question that you pose, or they have to speak against it. They must back it with evidence before their answers will be accepted. And for that reason, the flow of information and also achieving the goals of learning becomes slow because they always have to think about the question before they provide an answer. And for that reason, many students who are used to the lecture method find it difficult to participate in discussion class. And so students in the lecture culture are prone to thinking that the discussion method is time-wasting activity and they lose interest in the teaching learning process. So students who always prefer the lecture method to the discussion method will now see this method of teaching as a time-wasting activity because always you have to ask them questions, and once they are being asked the question, they have to think about the question before they can provide an answer. Now, when this happens, when your learners begin to think that discussion method of teaching is a time-wasting activity and they are trying to lose interest in the teaching learning process, then this is where you, the teacher, you have to use your competence in using the discussion method so that most of the time the process is used, the discussion method is used in engaging students' interest. It is used in challenging students' present thinking processes. It is used in creating an atmosphere where there is an active reflection, where there is an interchange, exchange of ideas. When this happens, they no longer see this method of teaching as a time-wasting activity because they find themselves fully engaged and the lessons or the topics on which they are sharing ideas are topics that are of interest to them. Now, what is the teacher's role in a discussion? And so the teacher, you must be skillful and clever at using questions during discussion sessions. And you must also use extensively probing questions, which is very effective in provoking thought. So if you want to provoke the thought processes of your learners, then you should be able to use questions that are probing. You ask questions, and when they present an answer, their answer should also bring out a new question. When this is done, it is able to provoke their thought processes and they are able to think widely concerning the issue presented to them. So, for instance, instead of asking your learners this question, why is hydropower or hydroelectric power cheaper to run than the thermal electric power? You realize that in this question you have already suggested part of the answer to your learners, that hydroelectric power is cheaper. And so already some are going to tell you it is cheaper and they may not even move further. But let's see if we are to put it this way. What is the advantage of hydroelectric power over the thermal electric power? So here, the learner must know advantages of hydroelectric power. The learner should also know the advantages of thermal electric power before he or she will compare and contrast and then decide that this has these advantages over there. And as a teacher, do not attempt to answer all the questions that your learners will raise during the discussion session. So sometimes redirect most of the questions to your students. So questions that they ask, you can just redirect it back to them. And when you do this, it provides you, the teacher, with two major advantages. And one is that it ensures an increased participation on the part of the students. So it is able to help you, the teacher, to actively involve all your students in the discussion process. And secondly, when you do not have an answer to a particular question, you realize that the system itself will bail you out. So because you redirect the questions to the learners, they will provide an answer to the question that was asked by their own colleagues. So now let's look at class and group discussion, and we must understand that it is not always that discussion will be between the teacher and the class. Discussion can also take place between and among students. And so, as a teacher, you should provide students with issues. Students having issues with stage fright. Students who lack knowledge on the topic. provide them the necessary encouragement and motivation for them to participate in discussion. There are some students, when you ask them to lead a discussion, they are going to shiver. And it is your role as a teacher to give them the necessary encouragement and motivation for them to participate. And group discussion permits a greater number of students to present on a variety of problems. They gain experience in various ways of integrating facts. They gain experience in formulating hypotheses. They are able to amass a wealth of relevant information and evaluate conclusions that has been arrived at. What is the purpose and learning mode for using discussion method? So the purpose for using discussion method of teaching is to promote an exchange of information and ideas among members of a group or a class. So anytime we use discussion, then we want to promote the exchange of ideas. And the predominant learning mode when using discussion is auditory. And the normal group size that is used can be from small to medium, and normally between 2 to 8 students in a group. So we must understand that anytime we are doing discussion, then the auditory mode, the sense of hearing is activated. Everybody wants to speak, and so once you present your information, your colleagues are able to hear whatever message that you gave them. What are some of the suggestions that can enhance effective discussion? So, as a teacher, think carefully about the initial questions that you will ask and prepare students for the discussion through reading or a laboratory experience. So, you can give them a reading assignment. You can have a field trip with them. Then, afterwards, you can have the discussion. And provide a sheet of topics or questions that will help or serve as a guide for the discussion. And facilitate discussion through planning, questioning, and summarizing. So you plan the entire discussion process, then you use questions during the discussion, and finally you summarize the key ideas from the topic where students share their ideas on. Students, in this session we look at the discussion method of teaching and the purpose for using this teaching method. And we saw that this method promotes exchange of ideas. Now, as we bring the session to an end, let's have a take home. Now, why do many students frown against discussion method of teaching? Then 2, how can the teacher use discussion method to provoke student thought? I hope you enjoyed this session on discussion method of teaching.